doesn't affect every organization, but like, you might have nurses, for instance, and medical staff and things like that, but you guys do have a maintenance staff to take care of the facilities, and they're obviously really involved with this. So, it's kind of one of these a little bit more hidden. A lot of people don't quite understand what it's for. But one of the things is that the scope of this is basically so that anytime you're doing servicing or maintenance of any kind of equipment or machine, that any unexpected startup, they don't get an injury off of that or an amputation or something along those lines. That's kind of what this program leads us into, is that we want to prevent these kind of things from happening to folks, and it's really important to kind of talk about that. Now, construction has their own standards, so they basically cover this a little bit differently, but generally general industry and construction aren't necessarily interchangeable unless they basically say that they're going to follow one or the other. So in this particular case, this program doesn't go into construction. It could possibly go into some agriculture. If it's a corporate owned organization, then they could possibly touch about it. If it's mom and pop, generally OSHA doesn't get into mom and pop agricultural type situations. Of course, there's not a lot of maritime that happens here, but maritime also has its own standards. Therefore, they have their own lockout, tagout requirements there. Oil and gas, drilling and servicing kind of have their own standards as well. So really what we're talking about then is installations under the exclusive control electrical utility companies. They have working procedures, because you can't always, when you're a utility company, you can't always shut down whatever you're working on. Sometimes you have to work on those things live. So you have to have certain procedures, certain tools to do those kind of things with. And it kind of falls into line with what subpart S in the general industry standard is, basically that anytime you're dealing with electricity and you have an electrician doing it, that they have certain work practices that they go through. Now, the rest of us generally fall then into a situation in which we're following lockout, tagout. So there's some other exceptions to the rule here. Is if it's minor tool changes or adjustments, or you're doing some other kind of minor servicing or whatever, and it takes place during normal operations, it's repetitive, it's routine, and it's an integral part of how things are done, and you also have other procedures to protect people during this process, then you don't necessarily going to fall under the OSHA standard for this. Okay, but you have to really take a look at it, because there's very few things that will fall into this. There's some other exceptions that go with this, as far as if it's a cord and plug piece of equipment and you have exclusive control over the plug. Now, this actual hand drill here, I label it, I put it on a workbench that's for repair of hand tools and stuff like that, and everyone understands that anything that's sitting on that table is considered under repair and not to grab it. That's one thing. That exclusive control almost means that you have to have that plug in your pocket to have exclusive control, that you have to have that kind of control over that, okay? So you basically have three types of employees in this process. Authorized employees, those are those people that are trained on how to use lockout, tagout, and they're the ones doing the servicing and the maintenance. Those are the guys that are supposed to use the lockout, tagout program. They're the ones that are applying the lock. Those are the guys that are doing the work, and they're the ones that are removing the lock at the end of this, okay? But you also have affected employees, and those affected employees may be the ones that are actually operate that piece of equipment on a regular basis. But they need to have a clear understanding of, wow, what's involved in this process, as far as, if I see a lock or a tagout, what does that mean to me? What is this program we're talking about? So they have to have an understanding of what's involved in that program, okay? Could even be a janitor that just sweeps up, or a custodian, or an engineer, whatever you want to call them, that cleans up around that area. They also need to have an understanding of what is involved in the lockout, tagout program, so that they don't get involved with those things, inadvertently turn something on that could get somebody injured, okay? Other employees would be maybe office staff, or people that just might be intermittently out into your area, but they kind of need to have an understanding of just a basic understanding of what this is, so that they don't get involved with it either. So what are we talking about? Basically, you should have, when you look at those machines, you should have some place that you're going to turn off the energy to, okay? So that it no longer has the type of energy. So in some pieces of equipment, you might have more than one or two types of energy sources coming into it. Could be pneumatic, could be electrical, could be hydraulic, could be, you name it, it could be a different type of energy source coming into that. So you need to take a look at each one of these pieces of equipment you have and determine, where are we going to lock it out at? Where's the place that we're going to keep that material from starting up accidentally, okay? So it could be a circuit breaker, it could be a you know, a shut-off switch to electrical panel or something along those lines. It could be a block, anything like that. Lockout is actually where now you're going to put some kind of a locking device on there so that people can't interfere. So once you've turned it off, they can't re-energize it until the lock is removed. Now, in a lot of cases, that particular lockout system might be in plastic. So it may mean that you know, all this basically does is keep honest people honest. If someone's actually trying to get into it, they're going to get into it. There's ways around it, but what you're trying to do is let people know that you don't want them getting involved in this particular process. The different types of energy, again, can vary. Might be electrical, pneumatic, mechanical, gravity. We just had a fatality in the state where a dump truck wasn't braced properly and it came down, and it was basically off of gravity that this thing came down. Okay, so there is all kinds of different types of stored energy that we have that we should be concerned with, okay? Tension, steam, those kind of things. Why wouldn't you consider then push buttons and selector switches and those kind of things as being the lockout point for that particular type of equipment? Well, they could fail. That's one point, but there's really a deeper point involved in this. Anybody have any ideas? You still have the power going to the control panel. You haven't removed the power, right? And you could come up with a lockout device to lock these out. The problem is that you still have that power coming to the piece of equipment. It's still behind the circuit breaker, or it's still on the control panel, or whatever you want to call it, all right? So really what you want to do is isolate it past this point or more upline from that point. So the circuit breaker that would supply the electrical to these types of switches, that's where you want to lock it out at, okay?